Hey y'all, hey y'all, hey y'all. However this finds you, I do hope this finds you well. Listen, I'm not going to be on here for a long time, but I am going to be on here for a New York said it wants no parts of AI in schools type of time. Come with me, come with me. Schools here in New York are closed, so what better time to talk about tea that's happening when it comes to AI and education? The city's response to AI is setting a pattern that other places across the country are going to follow, whether they want to admit it or not. So here's what's happening. The City of New York's Department of Education was supposed to release final guidance on artificial intelligence in public schools by the end of June. The draft guidance came out in about March, and it used a traffic-like framework that mapped what teachers could and could not do with AI tools inside of their classrooms. The department received nearly 6,500 public comments on the draft. Parents packed public meetings. A coalition of parents, teachers, students, artists, they rallied outside of City Hall demanding a 2-year moratorium on generative AI in schools. The public advocate joined the rally. More than half of city council members signed a letter urging the mayor and the current chancellor to pause AI use in schools entirely. A broader petition asking for a moratorium has collected thousands of signatures, and in response to all this, the department announced that the final guidance is being delayed. I want to be precise about what this is because the news coverage is calling it a delay, and the official statements are calling it a course correction. And what it actually is, when you read the situation through the right frame, is the institution discovering after the fact that it had tried to make a move, it tried to make policy decisions about families without families truly being in the room. This is the pattern I want you to see, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You will see it in every district across the country. I promise you. The previous administration here in New York, under Chancellor David Banks, was warm to AI. Banks publicly said that AI could revolutionize how the school system functions, and he allowed schools to experiment widely. He never released a clear policy, which left individual schools to make their own decisions, which meant the technology was already operating in classrooms across the city before any guidance existed at all. When the current administration came in, they inherited an installed base of AI tools that families had never been asked to weigh in on, deployed in classrooms whose teachers had not been trained to evaluate them, surfacing homework and grading and student counseling and IEP development in ways that nobody at the central office had a comprehensive view of. The draft policy from March was the first attempt to retroactively impose a framework on a deployment that was already happening, and the families finally responded with the volume of a rally at City Hall because they had not been asked anything to begin with. That is not a process failure. I have spent a significant amount of time building a framework which I define as the governance infrastructure that enables communities most affected by AI systems to exercise actual decision-making authority over the deployment, evaluation, and nurturing of those systems. Existing AI governance frameworks frequently conflate participation with power. What happened here in New York is what happens when participation is performed without power. Families were given 6,500 comment slots on a policy that was already drafted. They were not given the authority to stop deployment before it started because the deployment was going without their knowledge. They weren't even given the authority to require the institution to demonstrate the tools were safe before adoption, because the tools were already moving. They were given the option to comment on what had already been done. That's like painting somebody's house yellow and be like, girl, you like it? No. The difference between participation and power, that's the gap. So those parents were standing outside of City Hall. They were trying to close that gap with their bodies because the institution had not built the infrastructure that would have allowed them to close it through process. Let me walk you through the translation layer real quick. what it would have looked like inside this situation, because the difference between governance and governance theater becomes very concrete when you apply it to a specific case. The first thing required is that families have standing authority over AI deployment in their own children's classrooms before any tool went live, not after. The standing authority would have meant a parent body with reserved decision-making power, not an advisory committee or a consultation process, not a public comment window. Reserved decision-making power means that if the parent body says no, the deployment does not proceed, even if the central office wants to. That is enforcement authority, and it is the component that is missing from almost every AI governance framework currently operating in American public education. The second thing required is that the evidence families bring to the conversation is treated as expertise rather than anecdote. When a parent at the rally describes an app being used in her son's school that records when he goes to the bathroom and how much sleep he gets and his mood and photos of him, what the parent was bringing was not a story, it was data. It was a documented use case showing what the technology actually does inside the classroom and his life. This was gathered by the person closest to the deployment and the person most accountable for the child's safety. Treat that testimony as evidence with the same weight as any vendor's white paper or any superintendent's risk assessment or any consultant's audit report. Existing AI governance frameworks treat that testimony as data, as input. The distinction sounds subtle, but it isn't. Input is something that the institution receives and must respond to. The third thing required is that the institutions deploying these tools build participation in infrastructure before the deployment, not in response to backlash. The 6,500 comments the city received were the system telling the institution after the fact that the institution had not done the work that it should have done from jump. A standing family advisory board with reserved authority over technology decisions operating before any AI tool went live in a New York City classroom would have surfaced the same concerns at a fraction of the political costs and with significantly more institutional credibility, because the conversation would have happened with the people who had standing to be in it rather than with people who had to take to the streets to claim standing that they were never given. I'm not telling you that what is happening here in New York is uniquely bad, but what is happening in every district in the country and in New York is having these conversations publicly. I'll actually give credit to the city for that, to the parent coalitions that organized, the council members who signed the letter, the public advocate who showed up, and the chancellor who is at least willing to delay the policy rather than shove it down people's throats. More districts are not having this conversation. They are deploying these tools quietly, watching the same dynamics unfold inside their classrooms that New York is watching, and waiting to see what New York decides so it can use that as cover for what they will do next. What I want you to understand is that the pause is not the answer. The 2-year moratorium that parents are calling for is a reasonable response to a situation that has gotten away from the institution, but it is a response, not a solution. A pause without a translation layer is just a delay before the same dynamic plays out once more. The underlying problem is not the technology. The underlying problem is the institution adopted the technology without building the governance infrastructure that would have allowed families to participate in the decision as the decision makers rather than as commenters. A 2-year pause that is used to build the translation layer is actual governance. A pause that is used to negotiate the same vendor contracts with the same lack of family authority is theater. The work the city has to do now is the work that should have been done from day one. And the question I want every parent and educator and council member and chancellor watching this conversation to ask, including the families whose children are already being recorded by classroom apps that no one authorized, is this: who has the authority to stop a deployment? And what would families need to say to exercise that authority? If the answer is that the only way to stop a deployment is to organize a rally at City Hall, the institution does not have governance. The institution has a public relations problem that becomes governance only when it gets loud enough. That's what I want you to take from this. The translation layer is the infrastructure that closes the distance between the people who are credentialed to make AI decisions about communities and the people who actually live with the consequences. In a school district, the people who live with the consequences are families. The translation layer says they belong in the room with binding authority, not a rally with a sign. Build that, and you don't need the rally. The rally is the system telling you that you did not build it. Well, I told you I would not be on here for a long time, but I think it was a time worth having. As always, share this with somebody who needs to hear it today. Hit that like button, subscribe for more, and remember, as always, you are capable of big things. I'll see you next time.